Joining us now is former NATO Commander Rear Admiral Chris Parry. Thanks for coming on board, Chris. I think the most important question is this. Obviously, critics of Israel, pro-Palestine supporters, are doubting the veracity of Israel's claim that this was a tragic accident, a mistake. So the question to you is it plausible what Netanyahu and his military chiefs are saying, that this was a mistake? Is that plausible?
I think it's more than plausible. It's entirely correct. They were very quick in coming up and saying, yeah, it's our fault, we did it, and we've made a mistake. And I think anybody who's been involved in a complex scenario like this at night, with lots of data being conflicted, people in the system making mistakes, will know that this happens all the time. I don't think I'm aware of a conflict in my lifetime where we haven't had situations like this. If you look at both Gulf wars, we had a number of incidents like this where in those cases, friendly forces were engaged and killed. And I'm afraid to say this horrible tragedy, which we've lost good people in, has happened because of, as I said, a complex situation where some of the information has gone in different directions. People have made decisions based on less than perfect information. And this is what happens.
There's been some argument out there, rumours out there, indeed, Israeli whistleblowers speaking to an Israeli newspaper suggesting that elements of the IDF might be going a bit rogue and actually sort of taking the law into their own hands, if you will, setting up things such as kill zones and not sort of following military protocol in terms of the execution of their operations. Given that this is without doubt a huge headache for Netanyahu in terms of maintaining tacit support from Western allies, do you think there could be any truth in that particular report, that there might be some ne'er-do-wells in the IDF who are sort of acting indiscriminately?
Alex, we don't know is the answer. You know, we're in a situation where the IDF is fighting against some pretty subhuman, sub-state fighters in amongst the population in the Gaza Strip. They're under constant tension all the time. You don't know how people are going to behave. All I do know is my own experience with the Israeli Defense Forces is they are disciplined. They do have reservists. They have fairly loose command chains because people can then use their initiative. There's no question about that. But they are disciplined, they are responsible, and everybody will be aware of the strategic impact of something like this happening. And when people say, oh, well, it was deliberate, you know, you've got to say, well, why would you do that, given the impact that is, you can see on the ground? You can't control all of the people all of the time, but as I said, my own experience is that they have very good discipline. And frankly, if it were the case, Alex, then I think you'd see a lot more incidents like this happening on the ground.
Chris, the Israeli ambassador was called as a matter of urgency to the Foreign Office yesterday. This is the first time an Israeli ambassador has been called to the Foreign Office for 12 years. And it's very rare generally for the ambassador of an ally country to be called to the Foreign Office. And yet the Israeli ambassador was so instructed. We demanded, or the Foreign Office demanded, a full explanation as to what happened and a guarantee that there would be a full investigation into this incident. But I'm assuming that as allies, if they say, look, this was a terrible mistake, we are investigating, that won't necessarily damage relations between Britain and Israel.
Kevin, you're right. I mean, Benedict said it beforehand. You know, Israel's not going to be stop being one of our allies just because of a tragic incident like this. It would take a lot. The fact of life is the Israeli Defense Forces have killed people, and they've killed 3 of our citizens, you know, ex-colleagues of mine, in fact. So you've got a situation where the government has to say to the ambassador, this is not what we expect from a responsible ally. So please don't make it a pattern in future that we have to actually see you again to say, look, you're going down the road of some of these countries we condemn, like Russia, like Iran, who do these things indiscriminately, and we can't really hold accountable anymore. So what we're saying essentially is, you know, we're known by the company we keep in this country, and we want to be able to keep your company, so behave.
We know that there's been mounting calls internationally to let more humanitarian aid into Gaza, not least from our own Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary. We also know, however, that Hamas has very often infiltrated humanitarian aid operations. We saw that jaw-dropping purge of Hamas affiliates in UN-backed organisations. We know that they used hospitals and schools as human shields. And we now know, following this attack on that aid convoy, that other charities are suspending operations in Gaza for fear for their own workers. So how does this all balance out? How can we or they make sure that food gets to the civilians in Gaza who are not anything to do with Hamas safely, and that these operations can be conducted without people working on the ground to deliver that aid putting their lives at too much risk?
Yeah, it's really difficult, Alex, because, as you say, Hamas has got a real grip on it. I mean, part of the tragedy with this convoy, of course, is that they initially were in company with an aid truck, which had actually had a Hamas fighter with it, which sort of departed into a warehouse just before the attacks took place. So I suspect there was a real confusion as to who was actually running the convoy in the Israeli mines. I'm not sure how you do it unless you establish some sort of presence on the ground. For example, we're talking about putting an artificial port into Gaza, which can then bring aid in, for example. Unless you control the access to that perimeter, and then you expose yourself to attack as well, you're never going to solve the crisis with Hamas controlling not just the utilities, but also the food and water in Gaza as well. Every totalitarian regime knows if you control the food, you control the people. It's as simple as that.
Chris, I don't expect this incident to change Netanyahu's course at all. I think he will continue to a point where he believes Hamas has been destroyed. He talked about a month ago in terms of that project taking a few more months. He kept it fairly vague. Given what you've seen so far, can you put any kind of estimate on when Israel might feel they've done enough to say Hamas is finished? In other words, how much longer is this going to go on for?
Kevin, it's a really good question. I think they're quite close. I think they're closer than most world opinion thinks. You can see that on the ground. You can see it on social media at the moment, how close they are to actually dealing with this. The fact of life is, until they've eradicated Hamas as the controlling authority in Gaza, until they've got their hostages back, and until they've actually said to other elements in that region, like Hezbollah, this is what we'll do to you if you try this in the north, they won't be finished. Israel will do what it has to do. They feel this is an existential threat to their existence. In fact, Hamas is saying that, and they really want to squash any potential threat from Gaza, and also serve as an example to anybody else who might want to try it.
And if I can, before we say goodbye to you, Chris, I just want to ask you another question, which is about this Israeli strike on a Syrian compound, which has taken out the most senior in the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps of Iran, and Iran vowing revenge. Can you sort of bring us up to date on what the emerging picture is there and whether this is going to escalate things?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's quite interesting, isn't it, Alex? You know, you look at what happened in Gaza and you look at what happened in Damascus. You've got a precision strike that has actually taken out only the people they wanted to take out. So the Israelis can do it if everything's working properly. That's the first thing. Secondly, Iran's not going to want to take on Israel directly right now. It's not strong enough. There's no question about that. I suspect what we're going to see is Iranian attacks on Israeli interests and people around the rest of the world, even in the UK. And I think also we'll see a lot more proxy activity from all the sort of groups that Iran sponsors, like in the Houthis in Yemen and indeed Hezbollah in northern Israel.
Chris Parry, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
Good to talk
Chris.
to you.